My name is Bill, and I am an alcoholic. By the grace of God, the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and people like you, and people who have gone to the great meeting in the sky, I am tremendously indebted to for the recovery that I have found. I had my last drink on December the 27th of 1972, so celebrated 48 years in the fellowship, and I'm really honored to be here tonight. Been looking forward to this somewhat. I mean, I'm an introvert, so I don't really like speaking, but I do it, and I do like I do like the fellowship, and I do like the sharing, and somehow I get over my fear, and we get through it. So. Speaking with Ollie about the kind of the ground rules for this, he said wasn't wanting, a story, but more stay focused on the topic, or a big hook is going to come out and drag me off the screen. So, but I did listen to a number of other people who had shared their little piece of the program, and I noticed that they wandered a bit. So I'm going to take a little license from that and wander somewhat. To talk 40 minutes on one sentence is going to be kind of tough. Uh, but I'm going to try to stay with it. Ali asked me, what was a good theme for this, and so that was the one I chose. Our thinking will, as time passes, in some cases a long time, uh, be more on the plane of inspiration. We will come to rely upon it. So he asked me also to think about this and to pray about this. And one of the things that came up, I thought we'd just start off with a little bit of fun before I get too serious. But uh, the subject of thinking, when I came into AA, they had that sign up on the wall that said "Think, think, think." I wanted to go and tear it down. You know, uh, I was lost and locked into my thinking. And one of the things that alcohol did for me was help me to not think. And not thinking was better than a lot of the thoughts that were running through this sick head uh, back in the early days and from time to time. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the 20 question thing about alcoholism. Do you drink more than you used to? Well, I kind of done that on the thinking issue to kind of warm us up for this a little bit. Won't go through all of them, but they're pretty apropos. So think about this for yourself. There we go. Think, think. Does your thinking get you into trouble? Do you find yourself thinking more than you used to? Have your friends and family expressed concerns about your thinking? Have you ever felt you should cut back on your thinking? Do you hide your thinking from others? Do you feel guilt and shame around your thinking? Do you think alone regularly? Do you become a different person when you think? Do you binge think? Have you ever tried to quit thinking and failed? So, yeah, my thinking needed to move in a new direction. I'm not going to do my story, but I am going to say what happened to me at 20 years sober, because it was significant. I came into the program when I was 27, worked the steps pretty well. I mean, I was a serious AA person. I had a really tough sponsor. I'd failed the program a few times, and he sent me down to live on Skid Row for 1 year. He told me that I was at a spiritual bottom and an emotional bottom, but I had not really reached a physical bottom, and then I could probably drink for another 10 years, but I wasn't going to make it. So that was one of the things I was really grateful for, not at the time, definitely not at the time. But when I look back on it, it is an experience that I would not trade for anything. I checked into the Salvation Army and began doing spot labor jobs, and went to AA meeting every night and 3 times on the weekends. And it was a lifesaver for me. And at 20 years, I mean, I worked the program, I worked the steps, I did the deeds. But at 20 years sober, I was feeling lost again and in need of something deeper. And it was at that time that I was in Oklahoma City. And I mentioned this at an AA meeting that I was at, just shared roughly. And someone said, well, you ought to go visit old Earl. And Earl was an AA archivist. He was the archivist for the state of Oklahoma. And if you were going to do your fourth and fifth step in Oklahoma City, you went to Earl and he instructed you on how to do it. Every Wednesday night, that was his part of his work in the program. And so I went over to his house and told him who I was and what I was looking for. And he said, well, geez, I hope nobody comes tonight. And as fate would have it, nobody came. And so I spent about 3, almost 4 hours with Earl that night. And he told me the history of Alcoholics Anonymous. He told it in a way, the early history. And he told it in a way that I had never heard it before. It was the Oxford group history. It was the early days. It was the pioneers. Sometimes they'll say in a church that, to understand this gospel, you got to read it in the Greek. And I don't speak Greek, but what I heard that night was a different program. It was the same program, but it was in different words, and those words touched me for some reason. We talk about the gift of desperation. When you're in pain, when you're hurting, when you're ready for something new, it has a way of appearing. And so it did that night in the form of this old guy who took me under his wing. I went home after my visit with him, and I started reading everything that I could on the Oxford group and the early history of AA, and just got deeper and deeper into it. It wasn't long before I stumbled on to what we would refer to as step 11. Of course, the Oxford group didn't have steps. They just didn't have any steps, but they did have a kind of a process that you went through. And part of that process was what they called listening to God, listening for God's voice. And I'd see it in one book, and then I'd see it in another book, and I'm 20 years sober. And well, nobody ever told me this is how you're supposed to pray and meditate, and I had always struggled with prayer and meditation. They had not come easily for me. So well, we read Spencer's remark in the beginning, open mind. I will try this thing. I will certainly shut my door. I am not going to tell anybody what I'm doing. What are you doing in there, Bill? I'm listening to God, So it sounded rather strange. And yet I did it. And it changed me. It changed me. Many people are familiar with the 24-hour book. I grew up on the 24-hour book. My cup of coffee, my cigarette, my 24-hour book, and I'm ready to do life. And I never really learned that the meditations in that book were the two-way prayer writings of a couple of women in England, poor women, struggling women, who brought their problems to God and then heard back words that came into their minds. All right? And they would write down those words. They insisted that we write them down, not just let them pass through, but try to capture them, try to write them, and have a record of our relationship with God. So that is what I started doing, and I think my relationship with God prior to this experience was very nebulous. It wasn't solid. You know, I wasn't sure who God was, but I knew I needed help, and I relied on that. But what this process did for me was bring about a sense of intimacy with God, and intimacy is the thing that I was lacking. Now, I grew up in an alcoholic home, and somewhere around the age of between 8 and 10, I remember my father coming home drunk and breaking up all the furniture in the house. And this was in New York City. People were walking by and looking up. My mother had myself and my two sisters out there on the street, and you could hear the furniture breaking up in the house. And I said silently, "You son of a whatever, you're never going to hurt me again." And it was like I put a brick in my heart that was going to keep him out, but it also kept everybody else out. And I think that everybody else also included God. Now, when I came into the program, you people broke through that wall. You did. I mean, and that was what was so necessary for my recovery. But my wall is thick. You know, it isn't a one-shot deal for me. I'm 48 years sober, and I'm still working on the intimacy issue, the self-forgiveness issue, and what I have found is what we're talking about tonight, that this process allowed my thinking to be placed on the plane of inspiration. Now, I was a little weirded out by this thing in the beginning. It was, you know, does God speak? They can put you in the state hospital if you have to be careful who you tell some of this spiritual stuff to, you know. Does he speak? Well, I learned this over time as I looked at my thinking. I allow a critic in my mind. And as a matter of fact, I welcome this critic in my mind. Oh, here he is. Boom. He's going to say some terrible things about me, and I'm just going to sit here and listen. Tell me more. You know, boom, boom, boom. I had some therapy many years ago, early in the program, and the therapist said to me, "Hey, Bill, if somebody said to you the things that you say to you about you, what would you do to that guy?" And I said, "No, I'd kill him." He said, "Good morning." See, I'm sitting there for alcoholism treatment, and I'm killing myself. Why? because I got characters in my head that are doing real damage. Think, think, think. You know, I got an addict in my head who talks to me. I welcome him. So what's the premise behind this thing? Well, you know, Carl Jung is mentioned in the big book. Roland went to see him, Roland Hazard, and kind of got this whole ball rolling. And Jung was very big on something called active imagination. Active imagination. And he found it to be a way to access the unconscious. See, I got a conscious mind, which is pretty okay. I mean, it functions well enough, but it's sitting on top of an unconscious mind. And out of that unconscious mind bubbles up all sorts of strange things. And the little conscious mind thinks it can control it. The little conscious mind thinks it is me, but I'm more than that. I used to get drunk and I'd say, well, excuse me, I wasn't myself last night. And somebody said, well, who the hell were you? Of course I was myself. I was another part of myself that I was not in contact with. You see? And what prayer and meditation is largely about is getting in contact with what? With the unconscious mind. The big book says what? The great reality is within. Is he in my liver? Is he in my spleen? Where is God? In the unconscious mind. And so we read on this step in the big book about inspiration and intuition, that we will come to know another part of our mind that speaks to us. And it speaks to us through this thing called two-way prayer. So I went, really studied up on this thing. I went to visit a guy by the name of James Houck in Maryland. Guy lived to be 100 years old. He got sober the day after Bill Wilson got sober. And he knew Wilson. He lived down in Maryland, but Wilson would come down to Maryland and they'd meet at meetings. And James got into the Oxford group and he stayed sober for the rest of his life. He never joined AA, never joined it. His grandson joined it. His grandson came home telling him about some of these things. He says, well, I know all about that stuff. It's the same stuff we used to do 50, 60 years ago, you know? It's just a different language. It's a different language. And so I went to see him and I think I was looking for a gimmick. I said, James, you've been doing this two-way prayer, the quiet time they call it. We'll get into that. You've been doing this for many, many years. Can you teach me what it's really about? And like I said, I was looking for a gimmick. I was looking for some pointers, and he gave it to me. And I was disappointed at the time. But over time, that's what the thing says. See, our thinking will as time passes. So this time passing thing is very important. And what he said to me was very important, but I missed it at the time. And he said this, he said, Bill, two-way prayer is all about the absolutes. That was it. It's all about, it's not magic, you know? It's all about the absolutes. And knew about the absolutes, read about the absolutes, wasn't really living the absolutes. And so I really began then to put that into my prayer life. The honesty, the purity, the unselfishness, and the love. I got a little quote here from Dr. Bob's last talk. He said this: "The four absolutes, as we called them, were the only yardsticks we had in the early days before the steps. I think the absolutes still hold good and can be extremely helpful. I have found at times that a question arises and I want to do the right thing, but the answer is not obvious. Almost always, if I measure my decision carefully by the yardsticks of absolute honesty, absolute unselfishness, absolute purity, and absolute love, and it checks up pretty well with those four, then my answer can't be very far out of the way." I went also to visit one of the pioneers, or at least those who had studied under him in New York, up at All Addicts Anonymous, a group up there. This Tom Powers had written helped Bill write the 12 and 12, helped him write the second edition of the Big Book. And they were probably the only 12-step group that I knew who used the absolutes as part of their program. And I learned something very, very helpful there. And it's really about step 10, about step 10. So I use the absolutes to be checking on myself. But here's what the guy said. This was one of those eureka moments for me. The connection between step 10 and step 11. I mean, you guys might have got it, but my thinking is not good. And he just said this: if you don't watch, you don't know what the hell to pray for. If you don't watch, you don't know what the hell to pray for. And so there's a flow between steps 10 and steps 11. There is a flow between watching and praying. And so I have to watch myself. Well, what standards do I use to watch myself? Well, what they used in the beginning were the absolutes: the honesty, the purity, unselfishness, and love. And been to meetings in Akron and Cleveland, and up there, I see on the wall the four absolutes. Only part of the country that I see them in, you know. And I think that's because of Dr. Bob and the influence that he had in that particular area of the country. And Bill was back in New York, and Bill was not as fond of the absolutes as was Bob. Bob was buried. If you look up Dr. Bob's tombstone, or you go to Akron and see where he's planted, well, right next to him, right next to his grave, you're going to see absolute honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love. These are the four standards that they used in the early days. So, how does this all come together? Well, what I have through my studies and then experimenting with this, and I don't know that there's any one right way to do it, but for the last 28 years, I have been practicing this form of writing. And I only do it for like 3, 5, 7 minutes, but it's part of a larger quiet time. And in the quiet time, I read, I pray, I do other things, I meditate, I do other activities like that. Used to do yoga, but those days are gone. But I watch. So before I pray, I watch. And I watch for what? I watch for blockages between myself and other people, blockages between myself and God, blockages between myself and my true self. All right? Areas that need forgiveness, areas that need healing. What are they? Is there a block in the force? And I think of my relationship with God, my relationship with people in terms of energy. There's a flow there. There's a very natural flow that exists between me and you. And it needs to happen. And there's a flow that happens between God and myself. And it needs to happen. The energy, the flow, the grace, call it whatever you want, the connection has to happen. Well, is it blocked somewhere? And if it's blocked somewhere, then that leads into my prayer. I need help with blah, blah, blah. Please help me. And then what do I receive? I receive guidance and I write it down. So God is speaking to me. Now, over the years, I've found it's helpful to start with a term of endearment from God. So I always start my two-way prayer with my child, my beloved, my sweetheart. And what does that do? It melts me. I melt. Why? Because I'm in the presence of something that's different from what I grew up with. I grew up with sarcasm and inventory taking and lots of things like that. And what I experience now in my relationship with God in the first few words are my sweet child, my dear brother. And then that kind of primes the pump and I let it go. And I write. And when I'm writing, my thinking, what does this thing say? I believe is on the plane of inspiration. I believe that I'm in conscious contact with the unconscious within me that is saying things that I don't know what's going to come out of this. And so when I sit down to do a session, I never know exactly what's going to come up. Sometimes I get a pretty direct answer. Sometimes I get sent in a different direction. I never know. But I always check it. Is it honest? Is it pure? Is it unselfish? Is it loving? If it's not, throw it out. It cannot be from God. People ask me, is this God or is this you? I answer them, well, I don't know. If it's me, it's the best part of me I've ever found. It's the part of me that wants me to be whole. The part of me that wants me to be who I am meant to be. Fully, wholly, W-H, not H-O-L-Y, W-H-O-L-Y, or two L's, I can't remember. But to become whole. I mean, and that's the purpose. The purpose is to do what? Well, it's to shrink the ego down. To shrink the ego down to proper size. Had one of those epiphanies when someone told me, well, you go to, what do they call a psychiatrist? And what's the slang word for him? And I said, well, it's a shrink. And they said, well, what the hell do you think you're supposed to shrink? You're supposed to shrink our egos. Shrink them down to right size. So that what? so that another self that lives inside of me, the great reality is within, that can speak to me. And once you start understanding that this is what they did in the early days of AA, this is what they did in the Oxford group, then some of this step 11 language starts to make sense. You know, we may be new at this and we may do all sorts of foolish things. Well, once I heard in my two-way prayer, and don't ask me where the hell this one came from, but I swear to God, it's true. My wife and 3 kids were up in Dallas. I was alone in the house. I'm doing my two-way prayer, and a thought comes into my mind, and it said, plant a tree. Well, that can't be from God, because I feel really stupid if I went out and planted a tree, if I acted on that. Whoa. And that was the next thought. Well, it might be pretty good for you, Bill, to feel stupid. You really like to be smart. A little stupid obedience wouldn't hurt you at all. There it was. We may do some foolish things. I did a foolish thing. I went to the nursery and I bought a tree. It was on sale. I didn't spend a fortune. I spent $12.99, I think it was. I brought it home feeling stupid but obedient. Now get this, guys. Stupid but obedient. I am not by nature obedient. Here I was acting on my guidance that seemed stupid. And so I went and I bought the tree, and I came home and I planted it in the backyard. And for almost 20 years before we moved, every time I looked at that tree, I thought of God. Every time. It was my obedience tree. So I don't know. We get guidance. It passes the test. Is this inspiration? Could be. So I do 2 things in my two-way prayer. One is I bring a question, I bring a problem, I bring my step 10, looking for the blockages in my heart and asking for help. And then I always, at the end of it, look at the day ahead. Because that little line is in the big book, and it's just something that they did. So I quickly review my day ahead. I'm going to meet with this guy. I'm going to call this person. What comes up? Now, it's not a to-do list, but it's guidance. Call so-and-so. Read such and such. Go listen to a symphony. I had that one not too long ago. Listen to a symphony. I don't relax really well. I don't play really. I'm very intense, if you haven't figured that out yet. By nature, I'm very intense, Listen to a symphony. Well, that was the guidance. Stupid guidance, but all right, I'll do it, So I got on YouTube, found a Beethoven thing. And you know what I found myself doing? I was fast forwarding through the symphony. Let's get to the exciting part. Let's get to the good music. What is this slow? It's like B. Can you be? I had to go back and do it over again. Step 10, keep doing it till you do it right, to get it right. Anyway, I thought I would share a guidance, and I don't, but I just wanted to kind of get a sense of what it's about, and then I'm going to quit. I think I'm out of time. Ali, am I about right? About right. Okay. Yeah. So, and I don't like to go back too far because I like to stay current with my guidances. If I read it from 6 years ago, that's kind of meaningless. So I still got some energy around this one because I'm still working on it. So this was from last Saturday. I have a hard time forgiving me. All right. I have a really hard time forgiving me. The critic in me is rough. All right. And he appears, and I have work to do in that area. Lord, teach me to forgive me. I listen to Jesus. That's me. My brother, it is high time you learn what you teach. It is why you do it. Learn that it is your ego that questions its lovableness, your ego that must come and find forgiveness through me. The alienation you feel is your soul crying out for acceptance. It receives it from me fully and forever. And I got to tell you, we say on page 440, whatever it is, acceptance is the key. Uh, well, I'm not sure of that. I think there's another kind of acceptance, and that's what I heard in this writing. That God is accepting me, and I must accept me. Receive it from me fully and forever. But when, oh, when, that's it. But when, oh, when from you, oh, okay, yes, yes. It receives it from me. I receive forgiveness from God. But when, oh, when from you? When, oh, when from yourself? For the next 2 weeks, bring only this problem to me. And I've been doing it for 3 days. Daily sit in my presence, daily experience my love and forgiveness. At the end of each quiet time, I will but ask, and you, will you not forgive, accept, and love yourself? No other question but this. Come back to it. Promise me. Now sit for your first healing. My love means nothing if you will not share it with yourself. So, what I've known real clearly for my own life is God's asked me to do two things in the fellowship: help people learn how to do two-way prayer, and so I'm doing that to the best of my ability, and to take another look at the four absolutes. That there's something really good there that can be very helpful to people. So that's our thinking will, as time passes, be more on the plane of inspiration. We will come to rely upon it. I can now make a decision and not look back on it. I've gotten jobs. I've left jobs. I got ordained as a priest as a result of this stuff. It's, I'm clear. I'm clear. And that's nice. It's a nice place to be. And if I'm in doubt, I check it out with other people. This is what I heard. What do you think? So it's not that you just run off and move to Chicago if that's what you get in your guidance. But if it keeps coming up for 6 years, you might want to check the bus timetable or something. Anyway, that's what I got. That's where I am. It's wonderful to be with you guys, and I look forward to answering some questions or sharing some of your own experience with this. So thank you, Ali, and thank you all. God bless.